Many of you know Tom, but the way I like the way he describes himself is he's a husband, a father, a grandfather, a teacher, and an active community member. He brings infectious enthusiasm, compassion, and a true commitment to leadership and service in his message. If you've heard Tom speak, or if this is the first time you're going to hear Tom speak, I know you're going to enjoy his message. Please welcome Tom Thibodeau.
Thank you, Lee. Good to be with you all here this morning. And I had this amazing image pop into my mind as I'm sitting here talking into a computer screen. September 23rd, 1962 is when the Jetsons first appeared on television. I was 12 years of age, probably eating Cheerios, watching TV, and watching George Jetson speak to other people through his TV. Here I am, a George Jetson moment, speaking to people that I am not in the same room with because of technology. My first task this morning, thank you Zoomers for keeping us boomers in the game. Isn't it extraordinary the technological skill of our young people who have allowed us to navigate these very difficult and different times? My youngest daughter is in New York City and she helped set up a website for me and she's been recording me so I have videos now online. And I said to her, Danielle, you're a genius. And she said, no, Dad, I'm a millennial. I think one of the things that I've learned during this whole period of time is this, how much we need each other. Remember before we were talking about this great conflict of different generations in the workplace? And what have we come to understand right now? We all need each other. And as I look across the streets, across this screen today, I see a number of people are my age. I will just tell you this, our role in the community as elders has one specific purpose, and as that to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prepare and support the next generation of leaders, not only for Rotary, for our community, and for every organization that we touch in this community. I'd like to start today with this quote from Margaret Wheatley in her book, Who Do We Choose to Be? Facing Reality, Claiming Leadership, and Restoring Sanity. And she writes, it is possible to find a path of contribution and meaning if we turn our attention away from issues beyond our control and focus on the people around us who are yearning for good leadership and engage them in work that is within reach. It is possible to use our influence and power to create islands of sanity in the midst of a raging destructive sea. It is possible to use our influence and power to create islands of sanity in the midst of a raging destructive sea. So Andrew, thank you for this idea. Lee, thank you for hosting. Thank you for participating today, because I think this is the work of Rotary, is to create an island of sanity, a place where you gather together, where good people do good work together. Now, one of the things I'm talking about leadership today, I'm really not going to say anything new. In fact, I'm not new, innovative, or creative. Look at me. I'm just an old guy who's had a lot of experience and been blessed in many different ways. But I do believe in saying some things that are true. So one of the things that's going to happen is that I would like you to think about the four-way method in a new way. I would like you to think about the four-way method as being the foundation of all leadership. Is it the truth? Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In times of crisis, in times of difficulty, we need people that we can trust. If you tell the truth, people will trust you. If they trust you, they'll respect you. If they respect you, we come together. Is it the truth? Foundation of all of leadership. Is it fair to all concerned? Isn't this a question of our time? Is it inclusive? Who's in and who's out? Who do we include in healthcare, education, business? Who gets included, who gets excluded? Is it fair to all? What a high bar to set for ourselves. Inclusivity is messy. Max Dupre says this of servant leadership. Servant leadership is a privilege of being involved in the messiest parts of other people's lives. Hasn't that been your experience over the last 4 months? The messiest parts of other people's lives, trying to navigate in uncertain times, and yet at the same time making sure that everyone is included. Third, does it build goodwill and better friendships? During this time of where we feel so isolated, is there anything that's more important to us today than our family, and our friends. I work with a lot of leadership groups, and I've been speaking to a lot of groups online, and it's just rather incredible how people are talking about their tremendous levels in terms of loneliness. Here they're trying to navigate, keep people engaged, keep people employed, make budgets, build profits, stay in business, and at the same time, they're feeling this great sense of anxiety because they feel all alone. A woman yesterday confessed that she was going to drive 4 hours this weekend to have dinner with a friend, that she's been so isolated for 4 months she can't stand it any longer. So one of the things you gather, even on Zoom, is you continue to build community, and the friendships that you have within Rotary are still terribly important. Friends are people who gather together with a common good. And finally, is it beneficial to all around? Beneficial. Beneficial comes from two Latin words, bene facere, means to do well, to do good work. The only thing that changes any situation in any community is when good people get together and do good work. Do you know of another way? Do you ever see a group of critics bringing people together? We are so in the process of deconstruction right now in terms of criticizing that it's impeding our ability to move forward. Be plenty of time for criticism once this pandemic is all over, but right now we need to be encouraging other people to continue to do good work. I call myself also, Leah, an ambassador for goodness. Wherever I go, I'm finding good people doing good work. Throughout our community, it's just extraordinary, and so are you. Three characteristics about goodness. One, when you're in the presence of good people, there's joy. When you're in the presence of good people, there's joy. You enjoy being in their presence. Isn't it rather amazing, just even across the top of our masks, smiling with our eyes at somebody who's checking us out as a clerk? Some complete strangers looking and nodding at each other, not being able to speak clearly, but waving and making contact with other human beings, saying, hello, neighbor, hello, fellow human being, we're in this together. There's this book called The Second Mountain, Creating a Life of Meaning. He writes this: the people who radiate a permanent joy have given themselves over to lives of deep and loving commitment. Giving has become their nature. Little by little, they've made their souls incandescent. There's always something flowing out of the interiority of our spirit. For some people, it's mostly fear and insecurity. For the people we call joyful, it's mostly gratitude, delight, and kindness. How do you build your personality to glow in this way? You might think that a bright personality would come from an unburdened life, a life of pleasures and constant delight. But if you look closely at joyful people, you notice that very often the people who are the most incandescent souls are the people who have taken on the heaviest burdens. This is a time that all of us, our character is being revealed by the way in which we respond. All of us have gone through sorrow. All of us have had loss. I was on a Zoom program yesterday with a group of people in North Carolina. And the facilitator began with a picture of an iceberg. And he said, we all know what's on top. We all know the work that each other is doing. We all know about each other's successes. He said, what I'm interested in, what's below the surface? What are you struggling with? And all these people who people would recognize as being accomplished leaders all had things that they were struggling with. Just rather extraordinary, isn't it? What is it that's connecting us together is not only struggle, but it also is giving way to moments of joy, appreciation, and deep gratitude. Second, when you're in the presence of good people, there's a sense of peace. Can you think of a greater gift that you can give to the people that you're with today? With the high levels of anxiety and uncertainty, if you walk into the room and you're a peaceful person, leadership sets a tone. If the leader is highly anxious, what happens to everybody around them? If a parent is highly anxious, what happens to the children? Think about it for just a moment in terms of teachers who will be online with their students, how each and every morning they'll have to get up in their homes and convey a sense of peace and joy, connecting with young children who might not know where they're going to have lunch or when somebody's going to come home to take care of them later in the day. A great gift is the gift of peace, and it comes when you're in the presence of good people. You can be who you are. This is who I am. I can be no other. And third, when you're in the presence of good people, you want to stay. Isn't it interesting? Once you have a moment in terms of goodness, you want to linger. You want to savor it. It becomes so important because it nurtures our souls. Now, why is this so terribly important? Because right now, young people are watching, and good people want to work for good people. Young people want to work, live and work in a community where there is goodness, where people are committed to the common good. Good people want to work where there's and live where there's active Rotary clubs who are committed to making sure that the community is beneficial for all. Good work, hard work, noble work, your work. Now this is really old school, Confucius. Confucius said that the first step to becoming a leader is to become a good person. The first step to becoming a leader is to become a good person, to grow in our goodness. So one question I'd like to ask all of you, just for a moment of thought, what kind of person are you on your really good days? What kind of person are you on your really good days? And if we could unmute everybody, this is what I think what people say. I'm generous, I'm thoughtful, I'm patient, I'm fun, I'm concerned about other people, I'm listening, I'm present, I'm more loving and forgiving. On your really good days, you're thinking to yourself, this is so good, I should be taking notes on me. We've all had days like that. We call that kind of being in the zone. Isn't that true? The word for that is a marvelous term, magnanimous. Magnanimous means to be great-souled. And everyone is just attracted to us. On your really good days, complete strangers come up to you in the grocery store and just start telling you their life story. You can't get away from people. You draw people in. And we're drawn to people like that who are magnanimous. Second question. What kind of person are you in the days where you're not so hot? Let me take this from here. When I'm not so hot, I whine, I complain, I'm skeptical, cynical, sarcastic. And when I'm not so hot, I'm blaming other people. And when I'm not so hot, I withdraw, I barricade myself behind a screen or behind books. My world begins to shrink. I don't like other people. I don't like myself. My world becomes smaller. And the word for that is pusillanimous, puny-souled. Now here's the truth about all of us, the truth about human beings. All of us have really good days. All of us have days where we're not so hot. And I do this with every group that I work with. And I was working with a high school football team in a rural community, and there's a 15-year-old boy. Coaches tell me his parents are going through a difficult divorce. And I said, what did you learn by doing this? And he looked at everybody in the room and he said this, I'm your teammate. And whether you're having a good day or you're not so hot, it's my responsibility to love you. Whether you're having a really good day or you're not so hot, it's my responsibility to love you. In all of your Rotary clubs, in all of your communities today, in all of your workplaces, and your families, whether people are having a really good day or they're not so hot, it's our responsibility to love them. Service is love made visible. Service is love made visible. Dr. Martin Luther King said everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. A heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. Isn't that what you've been seeing in this last 4 months? People with hearts full of grace, generated by love, showing up at Wafer and the Hunger Task Force. Think about in terms of Rotary and the number of people that were given dairy products at the mall. I think it was over 2,000 people, no questions asked. What happened is that hungry people were able to get food for their families, their dignity was restored, and farmers were supported. Isn't that extraordinary? Not a government program, not something we're saying, well, somebody outside of our community. You got together and said, what is it we can do to serve those people in our community who are hungry, alone, and frightened? My last speech that I gave was at Monona Terrace in Madison, and the state was shutting down. And there was a man there as a custodian. I gave a presentation over Zoom, even though I was on Monona Terrace. And there was this custodian, and he's wiping down all the doorknobs, taking care of everything there. From what time I went in, I came out, and here's that man still wiping everything down with disinfectant. And from a distance, I said, sir, thank you so very much for your service. And he said, no, thank you, sir. All I'm doing is loving my neighbor. And I've seen that repeated over and over and over again. People loving our neighbor. Isn't it rather extraordinary? We may seem that we are so different, but all of us who live in the Midwest, we pretty much come from the same backgrounds. Think about your parents and your grandparents. What kind of work did they do? For most of us, our parents and our grandparents came from the farms, small towns, small businesses. Nobody that I'm speaking to this morning here was born with a silver spoon in your mouth. All of us are here because of the sacrifices that people in previous generations were willing to make on our behalf so that we enjoy the lives that we have today. My grandpa raised 4 kids and 40 head of beef on rocky soil in northern Wisconsin. 1929, my grandma gave birth to their youngest son and she died in childbirth. Her brother had no children in New York. My grandpa's on a farm in northern Wisconsin with no way to take care of a baby. So his brother-in-law adopted his son. He lost his wife and his son in the same week, 1929. His son was sent to St. Norbert's to go to school. He quickly ran away to Florida. His daughter was sent to go to school at a convent with an aunt in Joliet, Illinois. And my dad was on a farm with his dad. 1929, right on the brink of the Great Depression. In the middle of the 1930s, he marries a widow who has 9 children. She has no one to care for her. He marries her. They have 2 more children. He raised that family on rocky soil all through the 30s. And then at the end of the 1930s, what does he do? Says goodbye to his older sons who were sent off to World War II, not to return until 1945. Think of the sacrifices that the people who have gone before us, just a generation or two, have made on our behalf. And what you begin to recognize is that they understood that their self-sacrifice was necessary if the community was to survive. That, my friends, is leadership. Being concerned about the health and well-being of others, those that we might not even know, becomes our strength. This is the work that you do so well individually and collectively and needs to be celebrated. If I were to meet my grandpa today, he'd look at me and he'd, over the top of his eyes with an impish smile, and he'd say, "You mean to tell me you had hot water all winter?" And we're complaining about, oh, I don't know if I'll have enough toilet paper. Where is our character? Where are the ways in which we are willing to sacrifice? Because we know that as we're going to move through this pandemic, we're going to move through another presidential election, we're going to have to make some levels of sacrifice and compromise to continue to bring people together to work for a greater good. This is where hope lies. The word leader comes from the Anglo-Saxon word laideth, L-A-I-D-T-H. It's an Indo-English word, laideth, which means to step forward. Well, think of all of yourselves. Think of how you have stepped forward. Think about where you have stepped up and stepped out. Think of where you've taken a stand on behalf of your employees, your coworkers, and your families. Think about how you continue to step forward, not knowing what's going to necessarily take place, but realizing the work needs to get done. But the word laideth, L-A-I-D-T-H, is also the root word for the word load. So what happens when a leader steps forward? You bear the load. You bear the burden. Think of the leaders in our community who've had to put people on furlough. Think of the leaders in our community who are now scrambling to try and find people to fill in where people have been sick and now being quarantined. I talked to a man yesterday and he said, if one person in our warehouse gets sick, it closes down our whole business because you just can't find a forklift driver. And if one guy gets sick and we can take over his job, we have no one to run the warehouse. All of a sudden you're worried about the health, the well-being. How is it that my people will be fed and taken care of? These are the difficult decisions in terms of being a leader. And what all of you have done, you understand and know it takes courage to be a leader. It takes courage to stand up, step out, because you realize that you carry the burdens of other people. Good work, hard work, noble work, your work. Well, how do we do this? Well, we get a little bit of a hint from Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was the mentor for Dr. Martin Luther King, and Dr. Martin Luther King, the mentor for the Honorable John Lewis, that we stopped and recognized and thanked for his service to the greater good. And Dr. Thurman writes this: look well to the growing edge. All around us, worlds are dying and new worlds are being born. All around us, life is dying and life is being born. The fruit ripens on the tree, the roots are silently at work in the darkness of the earth, against the time when there shall be new lives, fresh blossoms, green fruit. Such is the growing edge. It is the extra breath from the exhausted lung, the one more thing to try when all else has failed, the upward reach of life when weariness closes in upon all endeavor. This is the basis of hope in moments of despair, the incentive to carry on when times are out of joint and people have lost their reason, the source of confidence when worlds crash and dreams whiten into ash, the birth of the child, life's most dramatic answer to death. This is the growing edge incarnate. Look well to the growing edge. Oh, my friends, even though we're not face to face, I would ask you this morning, how are you growing? What's your growing edge? What are the ways in which you are being transformed? How have you stepped forward and moved forward with your own life? How are you being creative and innovative? Whose fires are you lighting? Who are you inspiring today? Who inspires you? In order to be a leader today, I think we need to be witnesses to hope. Witnesses to hope. My favorite commercial for the last 30 years goes like this: hello, my name's Tom Bodette, Motel 6. And then Tom Bodette goes on for 30 seconds explaining as to why you might want to stay in a new and improved Motel 6, but that last line's a dandy, isn't it? Remember, we'll keep the light on for you. A lot of people travel in darkness. A lot of people not knowing exactly how they're going to pay rent this next week. My daughter, who lives in New York City, gave me a startling statistic last week. In the last 2 months, 26% of the people living in New York City have not paid rent. Can you recognize in terms of what's going to happen in the future if we cannot stop evictions? The number of people will not have a place to live. And all of a sudden you begin to recognize a lot of people in terms of darkness, a lot of people kind of wondering, what's our responsibility? Let's keep the light on. Think about the number of people who serve Meals on Wheels, who are not just spending an hour delivering meals, they're spending 2 and 3 hours, because the people who are receiving a meal, that's the one human contact that they have in the course of a day. Socially isolated and alone, and a stranger from the community brings a meal and says, hello, friend. Hello, family being. Be back here tomorrow. Is there any greater gift when one person can go to another hungry person and tell them where they've been fed? That, my friends, is hope, keeping the light on for other people. But we cannot do it for others unless we do it for ourselves. The world demands now that we recognize that we are spiritual warriors. The term I got from Margaret Wheatley, but more and more people are saying this, that you cannot do the external work of service and leadership unless you're willing to do the internal work. Searching your soul, understanding the depths of your spirit, the strength of your character. The journey without always begins with the journey within. There is a growing edge. How much time are you spending in reflection, contemplation, mindfulness? We have to understand that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and we have to be willing to help the next generation develop the internal strength that they're going to need in order to deal with the challenges that they face. This is the work of an elder. Courage is grace under pressure. Courage is grace under pressure. Courage comes from the French word coeur, which means heart. Leadership is always a matter of the heart. So this morning, as you begin another day, what's the condition of your heart? Are you warm-hearted? Tender-hearted? What are all the things that you'll say today in an email or a phone call that will be heartfelt? Think about all the things that you know by heart that you generously want to share with others. Are you tender-hearted? Will there be somebody this morning in which you can wear your heart on your sleeve and tell them exactly how you feel? The iceberg, that which they see, and those things underneath that you struggle with. And are we those same kind of listening hearts for other people? And haven't we also known the same thing to be true, that people have become hard-hearted and cold-hearted? We listen and we watch some of the things, even in our own local newspaper, and you wonder, are people that heartless that they could treat another human being in this way? But what's most significant about the heart are the brokenhearted. The rabbis were asked, Rabbi, why do you tell me to put the word of God on our heart rather than in our heart? And the rabbi said, we tell you to put the word of God on your heart, so when your heart breaks, the word seeps in. It takes courage to be a person of hope. And right now, you and I live and work in a community of the brokenhearted. We have no idea sometimes the burdens that other people are carrying, but they're there and they look to us for strength. Who do we look to for strength? Who carries us? Who are those heartfelt companions who will help us to continue to do the work? Finally, Fred Rogers, during the Great American, Mr. Rogers, wise figure that all of a sudden now we're rediscovering at this time because we need him. Grandfatherly in his teaching, thoughtful beyond measure. He was asked after 9/11, what should we tell the children? People are very much afraid. What can they tell their children who are highly anxious? And he says, have them pay attention to those who serve. Find hope in those who do the work. And didn't we? First responders who worked the pile, construction workers out of Ohio, iron workers, boilermakers, truck drivers who came to do whatever they could to rebuild New York City. First responders, police officers, and firefighters, all of a sudden we began to recognize how essential they were then, how even more essential they are to us now. Look for just a moment in terms of just a few months ago where the people in New York City at 6 o'clock would come out on their porches and cheer for healthcare workers, nursing assistants, custodians, food service providers, ordinary people doing extraordinary work, understanding that service is love made visible. We want a sign of hope. Drive out in the country, in any one of our communities, and look at those crops. Look at the corn. Go to a farmer's market and look at the bounty of fresh tomatoes and onions coming out of the garden and recognizing that we eat. Who are the heroes of this pandemic? Farmers who went out to the fields and their barns to make sure that we have enough to eat, not even knowing what their crops will bring in terms of a price. People are willing to make self-sacrifice so that you and I eat. Good work, hard work, noble work. It's the work of leaders who are willing to step forward and carry the burdens of others. This is who you are. Your courage and good work is beneficial to all of us concerned. Rotary is an island of sanity, not only for yourselves, but for all of us who are blessed by your commitment to our communities. So, Lee gave me 30 minutes to speak, and I'm honoring that.
Thank you, Tom. But we do have ample time for questions, and I would encourage you to use the chat function to raise your questions. And actually, while I'm collecting other questions, I did have one that was submitted earlier. So let me share this with you, Tom. So what are your thoughts on building hope and trust at a time when many are lacking trust in key institutions such as government, the media, and leaders in general?
Well, trust is a secret sauce. In our democracy, in our businesses, and our interactions, every relationship is predicated on trust. But like I said earlier, it's about telling the truth. So I begin in terms of every relationship by being as honest and committed to integrity as I can be. I give my word and keep it in every interaction that we have. And it's always a risk. At risk, sometimes you get burned. But the understanding of it is there's so many more benefits to it than that. Also, even though we say, you know, we're bombarded with how people don't believe in our systems, people are still going to work and making sure that they're, to the best of their ability, that they're serving us. It wasn't extraordinary in terms of the number of people that you saw in the polls during the primary this last week. People lining up and wanting to vote in our democracy. And what's happened is that each leader in their own organization, to the best of their extent, I think has a common good in mind. Now, what we do have to do is stand up to those people who be destructive. And that's what takes courage as well. So one of the things you begin to recognize is in terms of John Lewis, what do we replay over and over again? As a young man, he had the moral courage to walk across the Pettus Bridge. I just found this out when we were watching all that. He had 2 books in his backpack. One, How to Restructure Our Democracy, and 2, 7-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton, a contemplative Trappist monk. What he believed in is both, one, we have to do something to continue to improve our political process, but we also have to have the spiritual depth to be transformed. And that's what happens in this whole process. I cannot control how you respond to me. I can control how I respond to you.
Tom, I have another question for you. What is the biggest leadership challenge you have faced personally during the pandemic? What is the biggest one you had, the one seen for our nation?
The biggest that I've had, even though these Zoom meetings are good, and I've been having to go online. For those of you who knew me 4 months ago, you realize I was a complete Luddite, and now having to interact with technology, and I have found it difficult to create relationships online. If I had known somebody previous, then I was able to we'd have some common ground, but it just took that much longer in terms of posts and going back and forth in terms of dialogue. I think that the strength of relationships, there's so much that we can be through technology, but I don't think it replaces face-to-face completely. Second, what is our great need in our country right now is for community. Our community, a place to belong, join together for the common good. I think that isolation had been with us here for the last 10 years. I think that's why Facebook was so popular, because it used the term friends. I would see college students walking out of class, and the first thing they do is open up to see if anybody had contacted them. A pervasive sense of loneliness. What do I see happening right now? There's this great hunger for community, for people coming together. And I think this is what happens in terms of leaders today. Our greatest challenge is to bring people from different perspectives together for a greater good. If you're only talking to people who agree with you, that's a sorority or fraternity. That's a clique. Leadership, we have a responsibility of bringing people from different perspectives together for a greater good. Think about how you do that all the time in Rotary. People come from different religious backgrounds, different age groups, different economic groups, different walks of life, and you bring people together for a greater good around 4 basic principles. That's our task in terms of leadership.
Okay, here's another question for you, Tom. How, as Rotarians, do we take on political issues and people who are trying to tear down our democracy?
Well, when you find yourself in conflict, move to wonder. Let me repeat that. When you find yourself in conflict, move to wonder. I wonder what brought a person to this point of view. I wonder what's going on in their life right now. I wonder what their real concerns are. I wonder what I need to do in order to find common ground. All of a sudden, instead of having to be reactive and rather than being judgmental, I find myself in a place of trying to honor the space between us and look for what is it that we have in common. There's a project that they took on in Europe, and they brought people together from the different countries, Germany, Hungary, Italy, and they brought them together with the refugees. Remember just a couple of years ago, the number of refugees flooding into Europe? And people are kind of being overwhelmed by the people who come from other parts of the world, all kinds of fear and reaction taking place. So they set it up that what they would bring in is let's say a German citizen with a man from Syria. And they would sit in the room across from each other for 4 minutes and just look into each other's eyes. What do you think happened? Tears. All of a sudden, they recognize their common humanity. John Lewis, here's a great story from John Lewis. He was beaten, by 4 men with baseball bats, and the hospital wouldn't take him in. And so his friends dragged him to a safe house where he's able to gain enough strength and then get back home to be taken care of. He was beaten within an inch of his life. He's serving in Congress, and this is in the early 2000s. And a gentleman comes to his office, and a gentleman has his son with him. And he said, "Mr. Lewis, I beat you with a baseball bat. I'm sorry. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me?" And John Lewis said, "Yes, sir, I can." They talked and they prayed together. John Lewis would tell that story and says, never forget, people can change. There's where hope lies. We become so skeptical and cynical. There's no hope in terms of reconciliation and moving forward.
Any other questions or comments that we'd like to share? Well, hearing none, let me say this. Thank you, Tom, for your message. I can't think of a better way to start the day than to hear your message. So thank you. Thank you for the joy you bring.
Well, thank you, Lee, and all the Rotarians for who you are and what you do each and every day for all of us. Your work is beneficial to us all. Now, they're kind of the growing edge or the levels in terms of creativity. So here I am, isolated and alone, no one really to speak to unless people ask me to online, so I can't tell you how happy I am to be George Jetson this morning. But I've begun a new project, and my project is called A Conspiracy of Goodness. And my friend Larry Long, who's a folk singer, is called by Studs Circle America's Troubadour, has gone into communities and sings the songs of elders and ordinary people. So he sings songs, and I tell stories on various topics, and we've had them videotaped. And so we're going to offer them as videos for businesses, organizations, schools. So we have one on hope, we have one on community, we have one on friendship, we have one on generosity, we have one on the land, one on water, one on faith, hope, and love. We have one on the women in our lives, our grandmothers, our wives, our mothers, our daughters. It's just been fun. But also now it's got picked up by a radio station, WDRT in Viroqua, 91.9, and then Monday morning, starting Labor Day, you'll be able to tune into A Conspiracy of Goodness. Now, that's what I'm doing. But I think everyone who's online here this morning has found a creative outlet in order to contribute to the common good. And we need to share these with each other because there's an energy. I would say a spiritual revolution that's taking place, but it's just below the surface. And we need to come together and celebrate it.
Well, Tom, thank you. You are definitely giving us the opportunity to celebrate, and we hope to bring some joy to others today. Thanks to you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lee.
Well, I want to thank all our participants for being part of this kickoff event for the Rotary Leadership Series. Mark your calendar for October 8th. Our next speaker will be Carolyn Bostrak. Carolyn is someone who overcame abuse and trauma earlier in her life, and she has become a renowned speaker, facilitator, and coach to help others to build self-esteem and a life of success. So I know you look forward to that event. Thank you all for being part of today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.